Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and right now we're looking at Rowan, Scion of War. This deck comes to us from our longtime supporter now, Lexa. I had a bit of a snafu where I didn't get this message or I accidentally deleted it, so thank you, Lexa, for being so patient while I, now get to this video. And if anyone, if you donate to bring your video to the top and you notice that I'm not getting to it and it's been a little bit of time, please feel free to send me a message. I do make mistakes sometimes. I'm not perfect, and I want to make sure that everyone gets, their deck seen, especially such a fun deck like this one. So Lexa says, let me see, I saw this card spoiled less than a week ago and instantly wanted to build a Storm deck. This is my first build. I don't know if all the payoffs that I'm playing are needed or not. Thank you so much, Lexa. Thank you for sending this deck, and thank you for your patience as we get to it. I too saw Rowan, Scion of War, and immediately wanted to build a deck around her. But I too am a little bad at what I would call probably Storm style decks. So I'm excited to work through this list and see what we can find. As always, for our viewers, in the video description below, it will have the deck list we are currently looking at. And if you are a Storm master and you would like to put in your 2 cents, I would very much appreciate if you would put a comment down below so that I could see it, so that Lexa can see it, and then we can make this deck a little better all together. And while you're in the video description below, there is a link to the form you can fill out to send me your own deck. And if you, like Lexa, would like your deck to be brought to the front, there is a link where you can support the channel and do just that. So who is Rowan, Scion of War, and why are they our Storm, Red-Black Storm commander? Well, first of all, Rowan, for those who don't know, is one of our ex-planeswalkers. After March of the Machine, a lot of our planeswalkers lost their sparks, and Rowan was one of them. She and her twin brother, Will, is it Rowan and Will, or is it William? I don't actually know. I assume it's Rowan and Will. Yeah, just Will. Rowan and Will were twin planeswalkers, often paired together, and but they were having a bit of a slow disagreement recently, with at Strixhaven, Rowan realizing that she loves power. A woman after my own heart. So the natural progression of her to gain a little bit of black in her color was inevitable, if you ask me, and I'm a big fan. So lore aside, what does her card do here? Well, she is 1 black red, 4/2 menace, which is a particularly good, stat line, but we're not really going to be attacking with her. She says, when you tap her, spells you cast this turn that are black and or red cost X generic less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So Rowan is a very big mana reduction engine. You play her, you tap her, and then all your spells will cost less depending on how much life you lost. Now, obviously, we are not going to wait for our opponents to hit us with a lightning bolt, especially since they'll probably do it on their own turn and we can't activate Rowan. No, instead, we are going to drain our own life in order to get to that point. Once we can drain our lives to a very large degree, all of our spells are going to be that much cheaper and we can cast multiple in a row. Even a slight drain of, like, let's say 3, we've lost 3 life. If you cast 2 spells that are reduced by 3 generic mana because of Rowan, that is a savings of 6 mana, which is really, really impressive. So you don't always have to go all in, but I'm going to suggest some cards that give us a little more utility in the ways that we pay life. But before we get any further, let's take a look at the deck list and let's take a look at what we have here. Before we go any further, we can just see what the curve looks like. I really do like the curve. In these kind of decks where we're seeing a lot of high mana cost spells because of mana reduction, I really do enjoy the X spells that we can find here. Now, something worth noting, and we've talked about this in a few other Storm videos or X spell videos, is that the X spells are a little deceptive in our mana curve because Banefire is not a spell we're going to cast for red, right? Now, technically we can be casting it for red with Rowan's ability, but more than likely we will not be doing that. And we will not be doing it on a turn, like on the first turn, so its slot in the mana curve is a bit deceptive. Likewise, we can see at the 2 mana slot, we've got Crackle with Power, which, by the way, is the best inclusion here, not just in card strength, but also flavor. This is, I just love the art on this. I really like Rowan, and I feel like this is such a cool card to associate with her. But Crackle with Power, Cut of the Prophets, all of these X spells, red, black, X, all of these are not 2 mana spells. So when we remove them, we can see that the 2-drop actually goes down quite a bit. And then after which we get into, there's less X spells at this point because we don't have cards that are like 4 pips and X. So our curve is a little more, let's say, even than it appears to be because we have, let's say, upwards of 7 cards here that should be somewhere else. So it's not as bad as it looks. Though we're going to do a quick little peek in a second at our 3 mana slot because, as always, we do want to be aware that our deck really does function with Rowan as our commander, so we need to look at the cards that are the same mana cost as her, because almost universally we want to cast her out as soon as possible so that we can start tapping her and taking advantage of the mana reduction. So let's take a look right now at these cards. So we've got, as our only other creature, Birgi, God of Storytelling, which is an incredibly powerful card. As you cast spells, they give you red mana, and that allows you to keep going. And on the backside, because it's a modular spell, we can start discarding cards in order to impulsively draw 2 cards off of the top of our deck, which is frankly also worth considering. I actually love Birgi in these kind of decks because I believe it's she, because she offers so much on either, like if we're good on mana, she gives us card draw. If we're good on card draw, she gives us mana. And I really like this card. I think it's a really easy inclusion. And the fact that, we can cast her for 5 is also really good. Okay, this is going to go from the top, not from here. Okay, so let's take a look here. Jessica's Will is a very powerful card, so comes in no matter what. We can't take that one out. Seize the Spoils is good if we're playing both of the other 4 mana versions of this card, which I believe there's Pirate's Pillage, and I guess we are not. What is the other one offhand? Let's see. We're going to write create treasure, red, 4 mana. Hopefully that's going to... Big Score. Big Score is the other one we're missing here. And I'm a little inclined to suggest that we should cut Seize the Spoil for Big Score. Not just because the mana is a little easier. And I believe there is one more, to be honest. Let me double check that. I remember one with the Unexpected Windfall is the other one. So 2 cards, 2 treasures. This is 2 cards, 2 treasures. They're both instants. So maybe I was looking in the wrong place, but no, they're not here. Okay, so with that in mind, I would consider cutting, well, I'm getting a little lost here, considering cutting Seize the Spoils so that you could instead put one of or both Big Score on Unexpected Windfall. Now, they're not as good in theory because they have 2 red pips, so the lowest they can go is 2 red mana, but they do they do create those 2 those 2 mana back with 2 treasure tokens. And the thing is on a long term, if you are not using both treasures right away, because Seize the Spoils and like they basically generate both these cards generate the treasure to make up for the mana color, like the colored pip. So if you're not using both treasures, then the 4 mana ones are actually better. But the main thing here for me is just the fact that this is 3 mana, and I would just rather have, Big Score and Unexpected Woodfall, especially Big Score. I think Big Score is much better because there's the 1 mana pip. Okay, let's just say that. Play Big Score instead, because it's not at 3 mana. It'll go down to 1 mana, and it'll give you 2 treasures, putting you up on mana pips. So that's the one you should play. All right. Let me see. Toxic Deluge is very good and honestly does not compete with Rowan, so you're pretty happy. Yawgmoth's Will is a very, very good card, a very, very strong card, and therefore has to stay in there because this is the thing that kind of wins you games at times. But it is 3 mana, and we're just going to accept that. Deflecting Swat is 0 mana. That's not a problem. Dismember is 1 mana. That's not a problem. Seething Song is interesting. I do really like it here, so I'm not going to say anything. And it doesn't compete with Rowan, so we're pretty happy, so we'll leave that in. Necropotence is... Oh, that new art is so good. I'm so glad they're reprinting Necropotence. If you don't have one, you should be getting one by the end of this set. Open as many set booster packs. I'm not actually going to advocate that. Don't open packs in order to get cards. Buy the cards. But be really happy that this card is being reprinted and most likely will be... Maybe not this art, but the regular art will be at a very low price. So absolutely pick it up. Necropotence is so good in this deck. However, Underworld Connections, I'm having a bit harder of a time advocating for, because once again, it's at 3 mana. And the fact that it taps down one of our lands is a little more relevant here because we want to go off, and every mana will count here. So there's going to be situations where, let's say we put this on a swamp, that we want to pay the life to use Rowan better, but we're going to then lose a mana to do so, whereas something like Phyrexian Arena wouldn't do that, or Necropotence doesn't do that. But both Phyrexian Arena and Necropotence are less interesting to me because we have access, because Rowan's at 3 mana, and we have things like Greed instead, which I like a lot more. All right, so let's look at the other cards and other mana costs to see if there's anything that kind of sticks out at me. And there are a few cards here. Let's see. I just looked at one. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that Mana Barbs is so cool in this deck. Like, I absolutely love this inclusion. It's borderline genius. It makes so much sense, and it's so powerful because it lets you float all your mana, do a bunch of damage, and then activate Rowan right after, which is just really... Actually, the way you should do it is activate Rowan with it on the stack, tap all your mana, then all the triggers are going to go off, and then you're going to get, like, let's say you have 5 lands, you now have a cost reduction of 5. And your opponents cannot interact with that. Like, they cannot just, like, we have to be specific on this. I'm just going to take a moment to explain this. Lexa, you might already know this, but I think it's worth mentioning. Rowan is only at sorcery speed, so you want to put her trigger on the stack, and then if you can do any of the life loss at instant speed, you should do it after. Because if you do any life loss that is like, not a mana ability, so people can respond to it, they can just bolt Rowan, and then you're just in a bad position. The second that you have priority, you should tap her, and then do all the damage to yourself, unless you have non-instant ways to do damage to yourself, and then I do get it. There is a limit of how we can make this work. But good to know the ordering is really important. All right, so looking around, there's a few cards that kind of stick out at me. So Street Wraith and Grey Merchant. Grey Merchant is really good at regaining us some life, but if you really look at it, we don't have as many permanents as we do instants and sorceries, and so this isn't really going to drain for that much, even if it is just 2 mana, and therefore I don't really like it here. We've got better options. Exsanguinate is here. I'm going to suggest another one for like a long-term kind of gain in life. But Gray Merchant just kind of, it's too much mana. You don't have any of the synergies such as Reanimation or Blink, so we're just going to let this card go. It's not really there. Street Wraith, likewise, though it does give you 2 life, it feels really, really clunky. Like, you have to kind of naturally draw into this card, and you can't, if you impulsively draw into it, you can't cycle it. So I like it a lot less, even with the perk of that it's a free cycle. I think there's going to be a lot of situations where you're going to just not be able to use it, or it's just going to be, I don't know, somewhere in your deck, and you're going to wish it was any other card. Let's see. So I was looking at Strom cards, which is kind of a spoiler of a few cards I'm going to suggest. But Tendrils of Agony, I'm not going to be too hard on it because it does gain us life. But of all the Storm cards like that could be in this deck, this does feel rather weak. Like, this is a lot stronger in 20 life formats. Like, this is really hard to, defeat a player with. You have to have upwards of 15 triggers at least, like 15 spells, in order to then cast this to drain that life. And between you and I, if you've cast 15 spells, you're winning the game. Tendrils isn't going to defeat any opponents. All it's going to do is gain you, like, I don't know, 4 to 6 life, maybe 8 life if you had a really good turn. But that's not where you want to be. 8 life is not that meaningful in a deck like this. So although I really do love Tendrils of Agony, and let's just make the art a tiny bit bigger, I do really, really love this art. It's really cool. Unfortunately, I just don't think this is the kind of deck for it. I'm sure there's other commander decks that can guarantee all of those casts, but in a deck like this, when you've had enough casts for this to be a meaningful card, you've already won the game. So it's a bit of a win more card, and I would suggest cutting it. Let's see. The rest of these I really, really do like. We've got some high mana cards, and I think that's okay. I don't think that's too much of a problem. Command the Dreadhorde, I think I would cut as well. It just feels a little off of the main game plan of the deck. Like, think of it this way. Command the Dreadhorde is a really good, imitator of Rise of the Dark Realms. Like, it has Liliana on it. It's like themed that way, right? But instead of reanimating everything, you're reanimating the right things. And ideally, you're reanimating a bunch of low mana creatures that are more utility creatures. That way, it doesn't hurt you as much. Now, the main way you want to take advantage of this, just like with any other reanimation spell, is you want to be reanimating your own cards. However, you do not have a lot of creatures, you have 0 planeswalkers, and most of them are higher mana. So that's not really good for that here. And if you're using this to reanimating your opponent's creatures, well, then it's just kind of a value play, and this is a Storm deck, so you don't want value plays in a Storm deck, especially when you're going off, right? And finally, this does actually tax your life more than you would assume, because like either this card is good to cast or you don't cast it, right? And when it's good to cast, there's upwards of like 16 to 20. I'm just feeling out this number, but there's like almost 20 converted mana cost value of creatures in graveyards, right? That's when this card is really, really good. When you can start reanimating titans, you're reanimating utility creatures, you're taking the elves anyways because you don't mind, right? You'll just take everything and get a bunch of enter the battlefield triggers, get a bunch of like really strong creatures, and you've just halved your life total. And though that's already kind of taxing for a lot of decks, this deck especially is going to have a hard time with that, and therefore I really don't think it belongs here. Looking at a few other cards here, I like a lot of them. Ad Naz also feels kind of tricky in a deck like this. I'm not going to suggest taking it out. I think Ad Nauseam is an incredibly powerful card. If you've ever seen it in CEDH, it's so strong. And here, on weaker decks, it's not that Ad Nauseam is bad. Ad Nauseam is really, really good. And it's more fun when you're at lower power because you're going to take a lot more damage, and that's kind of the excitement of the card. But that being said, here you're going to, if you flip Blood for the Blood God, you're in trouble. And you're in a lot of trouble. There's just some cards in this deck. Blood for the Blood God, obviously Apex of Power and Peer into the Abyss, Brass's Bounty. Sunbird's Invocation, Command the Dread Horde, Beseech the Queen. Like all of these, Balaz's Citadel, all of these hurt a lot. And you know, if you've ever used this card in Commander, you know that it's never the first card you flip. It's always the third or the fourth card. It's after you've taken like 6 or 7, maybe like 9 damage, and you're like, oh, okay, I think this is a good ad nauseum. I'm just going to do one more, hope for a land, and just move on. And then you flip Blood for the Blood God, and you've just lost like 20 health total. And that sucks really bad. So, though I really like this card in this deck, you have to be really, really careful with it. And your opponents are going to recognize... Well, let's get into how your opponents are going to play against you in a bit. But I just want to bring attention to this. There might be a point that this card is worth cutting if you don't substantially lower some of the CMC of the deck, which means leaning more on the X cards than on the like big cast cards. Then it'll be better, but there might be a point that you have to adjust the deck for this card. This is such a cool card. This is one of my favorite cards in Magic. Speaking of Blood for the Blood God, no, just get rid of this, unfortunately. I think it's really, really cool. I get the idea that if you've lost 8 life for black, red, you get a bunch of cards, a bunch of damage, and then you exile it. But I'm going to suggest a few things. First of all, I'm going to suggest that discarding your hand isn't free in a deck like this. There's going to be a lot of situations where you're going to have cards that you want to play, but you need to sequence correctly. And therefore, you might need a little extra card draw to play the right cards in the right way, up your Storm count, or a number of other things. And Blood for the Blood God kind of ruins this. There's a reason that, you look at a lot of Storm decks and other formats like Modern, they don't play discard your hand spells even if they draw you a bunch of cards. I'm pretty sure Legacy has Lionized Diamond, but that's a completely different class of card. But for us in Commander and in this kind of deck, we're trying to get a critical mass of the right spells in the right order. And though Blood for the Blood God does give us a chance to kind of reestablish a hand and keep going, its mana cost is really restrictive because even if we have Rowan at 20, we've lost 20 life, it's still 3 mana, which is a lot. And the fact it discards your hand, which can really ruin your day. I'm not too impressed by it. I think it's a cool card. It's definitely one of those 40k cards. My understanding is that, this is one of the demons things they're known for saying. I don't really know 40k. At the LGS I go to, they play a lot of 40k, but one way or another, 40k is you're fighting for bad people, so I kind of do like the demons in a game like that. But here, I just don't think it belongs, unfortunately, so I would suggest cutting it. The second you cut this, cards like Ad Nauseam get so much better, so I think you'll be a lot happier to just cut that out. We have some signets, Swiftfoot Boots here. I'm just unsure why this isn't Lightning Greaves. Even though I'm going to suggest something that targets our our Commander, I think you'd still be just happier with the free equip to protect Rowan. So I just don't know if maybe there's something I don't know. I know players do value Hexproof higher, but the lack of a mana cost to equip is really meaningful in a lot of situations. And once again, we are a deck that is kind of low to the ground and kind of just trying its best to kind of, how do I put this, work off of as little mana as possible. And there might be turns where that 1 mana used to equip Swiftfoot Boots prevents you from casting yet another spell with Rowan, and that might be a bit of a problem. So I would do that change. Font of Agonies is cute. Argyl's Bloodfast, less cute. I think this is a bit of a clumsy card, and for the life loss, I'm going to give you better options, and for the draw, you already have better options, so I'm going to say don't worry too much about that. Bitter Blossom is fine. It's really just a blocker, and 1 life a turn is okay. It's something, I will say, so I won't be too hard on it. Call of the Ring, likewise, is pretty good. It's just a better version of Argyl's Bloodfast, so I do prefer it. I will say for the Bloodfast, for what it's worth, I do recognize this deck has a meaningful way of transforming the temple and into the temple, but even that, I don't think it's going to do the thing you want, and you just don't have a lot of meaningful creatures to sacrifice a lot of the time to gain the life back, which is the other perk of playing this card. In fact, I would say reducing your life to the point that you can flip this on your upkeep is probably more a liability than anything else. So I don't recommend this card. Underworld Breach is great. Okay, Life of Toshiro Umezawa. I really like this card. This card is really, really cool, but I don't know why it's here. Let's read the backside. For the backside. Okay. Do I want to play this card for the backside? And I think the answer is no. I'm gonna have to think about it, but I really don't like it. It's so much time. Sagas take so long to resolve in Commander, and then you'll get Memory of Toshiro with Summoning Sickness. So I don't really like this. It is cool and it's cute, and I do love this card, and I love Toshiro. Like, he's really cool, but I don't see it being very strong. I feel like you're gonna play this. If there's no targets, you're just gonna gain 2 life twice, and then this is just gonna get summoned into an eventual board clear. So I personally don't really like it. The rest of these is great. I do like the rest of it. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on before we go into my additions is we are really low on lands. I didn't really talk about the creatures because I do really like them already outside of Street Wraith and Grey Merchant, but the rest are good, and I think this is absolutely fine. All right, so our lands are low. I would like to at least go to like 35, 36, because you don't need lands when you're winning. That's correct, but you're not always winning. And when that happens, you might be in a bit of a tough situation. So I'd like to go to at least like 36 lands so we can guarantee that you can cast Rowan. Like 32 is lower than you'd think. Let's see what this says. It says you have a 68% chance to play your commander on curve. That's pretty low considering your commander is 3 mana. That means 30% of the time you don't hit your 3rd land. That's really, really bad, if you ask me. So with that in mind, I would definitely go up to like 36, and you'll be pretty fine from there. Was there anything else? I think there was, but oh yes, Infernal Plunge. I just remembered what this card does after reading of it. How often are you going to have a creature to sacrifice? I would just turn this into a mountain, honestly, or any other land. There's just going to be situations where the only creature you're going to have to cast is Rowan, and you're going to feel pretty bad. Yeah, this works great with like Bitter Blossom, but you're not always going to have Bitter Blossom, but you're always going to have Rowan, and there's going to be a situation where you're like, ooh, that extra mana, I'll sacrifice Rowan for 3 red, and if you win then and there, that's great, but if you don't, then you're pretty far behind by your own doing, and I think that's not ideal. So I'm not too much of a fan of this card. All right, let's go into additions. First of all, you're playing Sign in Blood. I think you can get away to also play Night's Whisper, which is easier to cast in this deck, both with Rowan and without it. There's Sign in Blood. I was just making sure. Just another card that draws you, like, it'll be 1 black if you've lost 1 life already, you tap Rowan. 1 black, draw 2 cards is pretty good. After that, if you want to play it before you tap Rowan, it's just another additional 2 life lost, which is 2 more mana off of cards. All in all, pretty good card, and you're happy to cast it at any point in the game, so I would add this in for sure. All right, the rest of these cards aren't in any particular order. This has been kind of messy because I've been kind of figuring out cards as I go, and so prepare for that. So our first Storm card that I like to see in here is Galvanic Relay. For anyone who hasn't played with this card is a set-up Storm card. It is not a Storm card that does anything the turn you play it. It is something that does something your next turn. So what does it do is for 2 and a red, it basically impulsively draws, but it impulsively draws cards that you can only use on your next turn. So this is really good in turns where you're just kind of playing Rowan to get a few spells off, but you can't secure the victory. And if you play like 2 or 3 spells, which remember, the Storm cards were really aiming to play like you need upwards of a certain number for them to be good. And so we want cards that are good at lower numbers of Storm, and Galvanic Relay at 3 to 4 Storm is draw 4 to 5 cards. And I think that's really, really good, right? And you're going to be pretty happy, especially at 1 red, and it'll let you plan. Yes, everyone will see the cards you exile, but it'll let you plan your next turn even better and adjust to it, so I do like that. And then when it comes to Storm cards that could win the game, I don't think this is necessary, but I do think it's worth mentioning. Ignite Memories is probably just a lot better. 1, it has a single red pip, so you can cast it for 1 red with the right situation. And 2, if you, this is just much more likely to defeat players, right? The amount of damage it's going to do is random, but in Commander, it's more likely that your opponents have higher mana cards. And so 1 flip where they lose 5 health is pretty nominal, right? So I think when this is at Storm 4 or 5, this can represent upwards of 10 to 15 damage minimum. And I think that's pretty good. Now, it is randomized. There is a chance this does nothing, which for you may make it less useful, or it might make it more fun. I'll leave for you to decide, but I did want to suggest this card. A utility card like Toxic Deluge is Fire Covenant. Fire Covenant is like Toxic Deluge, but arguably almost better. A very, very good card where you, at instant speed, pay life and deal that much damage to target creatures. This not only is this just a strong card, this is a very good enabler for Rowan because you can just pay any amount of life and be pretty happy with the results. So this is definitely something I think you should be playing. That's good in every phase of the game, and you're just going to be very happy with. Then, speaking of paying life just as you want, I've got 2 cards. 1 is from my experience in Modern. Hex Parasite is a card I used to play with Death Shadow all the time. A very, very good card. And apparently, according to the price, is seeing a bit of a resurgence. Needs a reprinting for sure. What makes Hex Parasite special is that you just ignore all of its text and just pay attention to the part that says a Phyrexian Black as the activation cost. So you don't use this to remove counters, you just pay life into this in packets of 2. So with Hex Parasite out and Rowan like without Summoning Sickness, you just tap Rowan, you hold priority, and then you pay as much life as the reduction you want for the rest of the game, right? I'm pretty sure if you have Crackle with Power, right, and Hex Parasite out, you should win the game if you can get the reduction off. I don't want to do the math there, but I'm pretty sure that's a really, really clean win. But even something just like Extenuate is just so good with this spell, right? There's a lot of instant wins you get with Hex Parasite that I think this deck would very much benefit from. Likewise, as another copy, which is cheaper but a little different, is Blood Celebrant. Blood Celebrant is a 1 black cleric that for a black you pay life and you add 1 mana of any color. Now, obviously you can use this to turn your black mana to red, and that's cute, but much more likely you're going to use this to turn your black mana to black mana, which means you can use this an infinite amount of times, paying the amount of life that you would like in order to activate Rowan the way that you'd like. The other thing I really do like about this is that this is a mana ability, which means your opponents cannot interact with it, and therefore you can just use it with impunity until you want to stop. And I do really like that. Like Hex Parasite, this sets up really ridiculous turn 4s after you have Rowan out, and with that, I think it's definitely a really nice inclusion. Will definitely attract removal, which could be a good thing in a deck like this. All right, I've got 2 more life loss cards. A little different though. Kurik, Son of Yawgmoth is a very interesting inclusion here. I think it's just a very, very good card in general, but here especially, it does a lot. Not only does casting Kurik cost life, so you can use that with Rowan. But also you can just cast it for free as long as you pay the life with Rowan. And then when he's in play, all of your spells, all your spells with black pips, as long as Rowan covers the generic mana, they're just free. And I think that's really, really good. Now, it isn't infinite. You do have a life cap where eventually you won't be able to cast everything, but you'll get pretty close, and as long as you end up getting an Exsanguinate out or winning the game, you're not going to be too sad about it. Likewise, or on the other hand, Kirk is also just a good value play where you can just run him out, and then over a turn cycle, when it gets back to you and he doesn't have summoning sickness, you can set him up with a lot of +1/+1 counters, enough to gain back substantial life per turn, which I think is meaningful. But I would probably say you're only going to get one good hit with him in before someone desperately wipes the board or removes him, because your deck is just too dangerous with him and your commander out at the same time. And which is why exactly I want that card in this deck. This is another card. I will note a lot of these cards of this kind of life loss, life gain mechanic come from a deck that I used to play, like at least the idea behind it, which is Eiley. I used to play Eiley Eternal Pilgrim, where you would gain millions of life and then lose all the life to all these life loss things, and it's just a lot of fun. So if you like this idea of the deck, but you want to play less so with the mana reduction and more so within a ridiculous amount of life to lose, hit me up, send me a message about Eiley, and maybe I'll make a video of her sometime, because she is such a strong commander when you realize how strong her first ability is. So with that in mind, another card that I really liked from that deck that I would like here is Vilis, Broker of Blood. Now, Vilis only goes down to 3 black mana if you cast him, and that's not ideal. That's still a lot of mana, but this card is ridiculous. This says whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. Wow, you have not appreciated power until you've had Vilis on the battlefield. This is like a lot of ways. There's a lot of black cards I really, really like, and Vilis is definitely on the list that just like really encapsulates what black is as a color, of just this, power hungry color of ambition and willing to give up anything. As you start paying life, you are going to draw so many cards. There is this argument that's like, oh, it makes Necropotence draw you 2 cards for 1 life. That's pretty cool. But Necropotence is already broken. This is just like more for all the incidental things you're going to do. All of a sudden, Hex Parasite will draw you 2 cards for free. Like that's mind-blowing. The fact that the Blood Celebrant will draw you a card for nothing is also insane. Like, Vilis is so good. And if you want to seriously consider him, I would maybe consider a few, like Buried Alive and a Reanimation package, so that you can get your best creatures on board. But otherwise, you could just naturally draw in, play Vilis, and kind of just look at your opponents and say, what are you going to do now? What, they're going to attack into you? They're just going to draw you more cards. And if they try to, destroy Vilis, you can pay into his ability to draw cards for 2 cards for every time you draw. 2 cards for every black mana. Which of course gets better if you have like Greed out and all of a sudden you're drawing 3 cards for 1 black mana. It's just stupid. I'm not going to go too much more into it. It's just crazy. Then I have the last 3 cards to talk about. They all kind of do different things, so in no particular order. Commune with Lava kind of catches my eye. It's very much so like Galvanic Relay, where it sets you up for your next turn, but you can actually cast these cards during the turn you use this ability. And if you're in a situation where you have the red mana to spare, and Rowan has a high number to it, the ability to kind of instantly draw like 6 cards can make the difference between winning and losing. It is a bit of a clumsy card otherwise. When you have like 4 mana, this is like draw 2 until your end of your next turn. It's not as great, but it's not the worst. So I'll leave that to you. It is also one of those cards that if you can put Rowan on 3 life, you're probably pretty happy casting this, right? You can pump the rest of your mana into this and draw like I don't know, 5 or 6 cards, and then keep going. So I do like it here. It's another X card, which means it lowers your CMC count when in comparison to other high mana cards, and I think that's worth considering. Then we have Red Elemental Blast. I don't think you need to play this, but it's something worth considering because it is such an effective way to stop counter magic, which is something that can be really troublesome for your deck to deal with. That's kind of it. That's the whole thought. There's this one, and there's also Pyroblast is this card with the same ability. If you're finding that you need to deal with counter magic, this is a really good solution to that. So I would recommend those cards, but that's up to your meta. Then finally, 1,000-Year Elixir has caught my eye, but I'm a little unsure about it. Now, thankfully this is really cheap on MTGO, but what it does is it gives Rowan haste. That's the main thing I really, really like about it. Giving her haste is very nominal because there's going to be situations where she's been removed, she's dead, and you have to bring her back from the command zone and then wait an entire turn to cycle around to get her ability. And 1,000-Year Elixir with the Swiftfoot Boots or Lightning Greaves makes that a little easier to do, so I do like that. But then it has that second ability that will untap Rowan. And I'm not as convinced with this because the difference between like 6 life loss to 12 life loss isn't that much. It only matters if you have one of your like strongest cards in your hand. But outside of that, if you're playing just a bunch of your generic cards, you know, just like value plays to kind of get ahead, you're not going to really care about the difference between those two numbers. And the fact that, you know, it does invite an opportunity for your opponents to remove Rowan in instant speed and actually prevent you from getting something, but it's just 1 mana you'd be losing, so I don't think it's too bad. I think if they had removal, they would have removed Rowan at upkeep instead, so it doesn't really make sense. So if you have the opportunity, you should be able to activate her this way. I will note this is the card I talked about that targets our commanders, so there is something worth talking about Swiftfoot Boots over Lightning Greaves if you want to play this card, but if you're not playing this card, just go Lightning Greaves. But this is a card that you'll have to play with to see how much of a difference it makes. But the ceiling of this card is really, really high. It is kind of it's not quite win more. It's more like a little less than that because it really does help you in the neutral game. But at a certain point, this card becomes just unnecessary. If you've lost 12 health, you know, and then you tap Rowan, then you untap her and tap her again, that the generic mana is not the ability that's holding you back, right? It's going to be your non-generic mana. It's going to be the cards in your hand and the cards you can draw into. And if you're just in a situation where you just can't get the right cards, the difference between the 6 and 12 mana reduction is just going to be meaningless, right? So just something to consider. All right, I'm going to wrap up here because we're getting close to 45 minutes. I miss when these videos were 20 minutes. I do really like Rowan. Let's get to her big picture. Rowan's really, really cool. I think this deck is really cool. To sum up my opinions, add more lands, adjust a few of the cards that don't do as much as you think, but like, you know, that you'd like, and I think I would consider a lot of the cards I suggested, namely things like Night's Whisper, Hex Parasite, Fire Covenant, Blood Celebrant. I think those are the biggest ones. Kirk is good, but not essential. And then from that point on, see where that deck gets you and see if you're happy with its power level. This deck is going to be fragile. I forgot to talk about this, but your opponents are going to pressure you as much as they can. And you're going to be susceptible to the pressure. Both your commander dying is really, really bad for your deck, and the fact that your life total is a resource that you need, you're vulnerable to pressure. So if you play this deck, be prepared to lose. It's okay. It doesn't mean it's not strong. It's just, how do I put this? There's this saying I remember is that if you're in the world of Magic and you are a black mana character, you don't want to be evil because it attracts all of the attention. And Rowan is very black mana evil. She stands up and says, I am super, super dangerous, and everyone should unite to stop me. That's kind of why I like her character. And that translates to her card, right? Her power level is very visible and very kind of nebulous. People are just going to assume you have the strongest cards in hand, and they're going to do their best to not let you get away with Rowan. But when you do, you're just going to win games. So really like this deck. I like the direction it's going. I'm really excited for the next draft. If you'd like to send me the next draft, there's going to be a link in the video description that you can send it that way. And if you want to, as Lexa did, support the channel and bring your deck to the front of the list, there's a link for that as well. As always, if you want to like, comment, subscribe, I would very much appreciate that. And thank you so much, Lexa. As always, your support means the world to me. And thank you for your patience as I put out the video for this deck. I am really excited to see more of Rowan, both in this deck and as a character. I think she's really cool. So I am waiting with bated breath here. All right, good luck.